Hello and welcome to another Crusader Kings free dev diary. This episode is named War, where I assume we're going to be learning a lot about war. Here is a more zoomed in version of the picture on the screen there, where it shows various pieces of siege equipment. It's also very zoomed in on the castle here, this Motte and Bailey, which is very low detail. I hope that in the finished version the castles, the towns, the bishoprics are all much more detailed and customizable depending on your own personal choices. But we'll see about stuff like that later on. As it does say here, it is under development. Well, let's get reading. Greetings. War, what is it good for, you may ask? A whole lot, I'd say. You can use it to press that juicy claim you've been holding on to for a while, or perhaps you'd rather use it to put the unbelievers to the sword. Whichever strikes your fancy. The topic of the day is war, and more specifically, how we go about waging war. I aim to give you an overview of how wars will be fought. I will not go into details about CBs, casus belli, or anything like that this time. Bear in mind that the game is still very much in development and everything talked about here is subject to change. Let's start by taking a look at what an army is made up of. Just like in Crusader Kings 2, the bulk of your armies consists of levies. Levies in Crusader Kings 3 are made up of their own unit type, simply called levy. These are essentially conscripted peasants, forced to do your bidding and are not very impressive on their own. In great numbers, however, they are an efficient meat shield, meant to complement the troops of your armies that have a far higher impact, men-at-arms. And here we have a show showing that you have 7,509 troops out of 7,509, with 400 heavy infantry, 200 archers, 100 heavy cavalry, 8 knights, and 6,801 levies. I believe the knights were rated at, was it 10 to 1? So they're the equivalent of 80 levies, was it? Which, only having 8, you're going to have to get some more courtiers over here to help out with that. As for the lack of variation here, where are the pikemen? We'll see later on, I'm sure. But heavy infantry, I guess that's 700 men. So you probably have a limit of how many personal troops you can get, and then each holding will supply a certain amount of levy. We'll perhaps learn more here. Men at arms, the equivalent to the retinues of CK2. They are trained troops that come in several different unit types which excel in their given role. There are base variations available for everyone to recruit, such as light cavalry and heavy infantry. But really interesting ones are usually unique to certain cultures or specific regions of the map, though all have their own stats and uses. Speaking of stats, there are 4 different values present on man-at-arms regiments that you need to keep track of. Damage. This is obviously the amount of damage a single soldier of this type is able to inflict on the opponents. Toughness. This is how much damage a soldier can take. Pursuit. In the aftermath of battle, pursuit increases the amount of damage you can inflict upon a routing enemy. And screen. The opposite of pursuit. Screen allows you to protect fleeing soldiers from being killed. So you have archers, horsemen, heavy infantry, and everyone is affected by this. But what I read here that took my eye, what was it? Unique to certain cultures. So perhaps this is a way to make multiculturalism beneficial within your empire. Whereas before, if you were Ireland, you'd maybe role-play in your best interest to keep the Welsh, keep the Irish, and invade other areas and make the English Irish and etc. But maybe now if you were to invade Wales as a united Ireland, the Welsh Highlander troops, which I doubt the game will go into that much specifics, but there are potential for this later. But say there were a Highlander special troop to Wales, you would then want to keep their culture around so you could have that beneficial unit type. Or if you were to go more to the steppe hordes, you'd be able to get better cavalry troops, maybe cheaper light cavalry, or maybe more efficient heavy infantry from Scandinavia or wherever else things are in the world. So I like that. The way that your own culture can manipulate which other troops you have. Very interesting. I do like the sound of that. Oh, here's pikemen. You have another screen here. So you have 20 damage, 24 toughness, 0 pursuit, and 0 screen. Yeah, well, a pikeman doesn't have a bow. He's not really on a horse. He has good attack, but he's more of a defensive troop. That's very nice there. Reinforcements 9 ducats a month, maintenance 1 ducats a month. Okay. They counter light cavalry and heavy cavalry. Terrain effects, it looks like woods and snow is bonus. Long pikes allow these regiments to form walls of spikes that can stop cavalry charge dead. Very interesting. Very interesting tool. Can I choose to sacrifice my pikemen to screen the rest of my units retreating? It looks very offensive. Is it offensive against all units, or is that offensive only against horses and other units? If I scroll over it, I'll get a tooltip showing less. I'm not sure. Well, let's keep reading. Not all men at arms are equal. You will have access to a few immediately from the start and unlock access to additional regiment types as you progress throughout the game. Some will be similar to each other, but may be tailored towards a certain terrain type. Oh, Highlanders. Perhaps. Others may just be a straight upgrade, but will in those cases be much more expensive than their weaker counterpart. Men-at-arms allow you to customize your army for any given situation. If you know where or who you will fight, certain men-at-arms will be far superior. Is there a lot of hilly terrain in your region? Then archers are the way to go. Are you facing a lot of cavalry? Bring pikemen. A smaller army will stand a much higher chance of winning if you bring men-at-arm type that counters those of the enemy. When a regiment is countered, it's effectively in battle will drop by. With its damage output significantly reduced. If the countered regiment is greatly outnumbered by the countering type, efficiency will reduce even further. There's a limit to how much a man-at-arms damage can be reduced, though, as to not make your expensive troops completely useless. Okay. So if I have more horses than you have pikemen, then I'll get a benefit over your pikemen. That's how I'm reading this. If we're attacking mountains, I have more archers than you do, then my archers will be able to have a greater damage against your infantry troops. That's what I'm getting here. Next we have a special kind of men-at-arms, siege weapons. Medieval warfare was all about sieges. Castles and sieges are very iconic for the time frame, so we felt that it was necessary to have that properly represented. You'll start off with access to a rather weak catapult, but it will still allow you to besiege holdings faster than without one. Later on, you will unlock improved siege weapons, such as trebuchets, that are able to speed up sieges significantly. So I doubt this is how they'll look on the map. This is just Paradox put them in a list. So you start off with a weak bit of nonsense here, you go to web here, and you end up with fucking cannons. I'm not sure when cannons historically were released upon the world. EU4 would have me believe it was maybe the 1500s. Maybe late 1400s, so maybe this is a hint at how the time frame of the game will be expanded maybe into the gunpowder era. It'll be very interesting if it is. My concern here, though, it's not really a major concern. It's not really something that should be concerned about, but that is that siege equipment was more built on site than built prior and hauled around in the medieval time, but that's something that needs to be looked over. If it doesn't affect the speed of your units, sure, just have a few catapults with you if you're that sort of siege expert, whatever. You can only own a certain number of men-at-arms regiments at any given time, so choose carefully which troops you decide to recruit. Levies and men-at-arms are not the only soldiers available to you. As a ruler, you have a number of knights at your disposal. These are the vassals and courtiers of your realm with a high prowess, which is the equivalent of combat rating in CK3, and represents how good a character is at fighting, and is used when they participate in battles. I love this. You can normally only have a few dedicated knights, but there are various ways to increase the numbers of knights, as well as their effectiveness. I'm a huge fan of this. Too often in CK2, just nobody of nobility would ever die in battle. You look at take the Game of Thrones mod, for example, and compare it to the novels of Game of Thrones. Knights were dying left, right, and centre. People were all leading their own troops, but in the actual mod, nobody would die because you only have 3 potential people. You'd have bodyguards, but very rarely would they actually be inflicted damage upon the battlefield. This way here looks like I can have all of my fucking best troops. Sorry about swearing now. I can have all of my best troops on the battlefield, and they can severely help my prowess on the battlefield. I like the idea of it being more interactive. I can maybe send all of my sons in. I'm having a bit of a inheritance issue. I don't know which son to perhaps go with. Let's list them all as knights and send them in, see who comes out. But it's interesting. It is. So this here is prowess of 15. So if he's on the map, he might be the equivalent of 15 other troops, perhaps. We'll soon find out, I'm sure. Finally, we have the commander. An army can only have a single commander, who uses his martial skill to improve the troops under his command. There are plenty of different commander traits available, which either have a direct effect on battles, such as terrain bonuses, or give the commander bonuses outside of battles. One such example is the ability to have supply last longer. Interesting, supply, I like that. I like that you can eventually run out of supplies. Very interesting, very accurate to what we're looking at with the world here. Alright, what else are we getting on here? So you, 20... Oh, so this is your list of knights, I assume. You're at 20. Count Richard is at 18, 16. Your courtier, your martial knight and vassal. Your half-brother, of course, get him out there. We don't need any issues for your children. Excellent, then you have the Holy Warrior trait. Terrific. I'm such a huge fan here. With armies out of the way, let's have a look at battles. At the very start of any battle, a combat width is set that decides how many troops are able to fight each other at the same time. The width is set to the relative size of the defender, depending on the terrain type you're fighting in. Being larger in flat and open terrain and smaller in rough terrain and mountains, I would generally advise against attacking larger armies in plains, for example. The single most important part of battle is advantage, which is essentially a modifier that increases the damage of all troops on either side. When a battle starts, all sources of advantage is taken into consideration. It can come from traits, terrain, buildings, etc., but most importantly, the martial skill of your commander. All of these are added together for both sides of the battle. The difference is then added as the advantage bonus for the side with the higher advantage. For example, your army has a total advantage of 40 and attacks an enemy army that has a lousy total of 10. This means that you will have an advantage bonus of 30 during the battle, which then translates into a rather significant damage bonus for your troops. In addition to the starting advantage, each commander also makes a roll every few days in an attempt to increase their advantage or even it out. This tug of war can be further expanded by various modifiers and traits. For example, the trait Cautious Leader will decrease your potential max roll, but also increase your lowest possible roll, trading a high potential for a higher average. These exist to make it, even in battle, a tad more unpredictable, but will rarely be the deciding factor. Soldiers on the combat line damage the enemy on every tick. When a soldier dies, he will be considered to be either a casualty or to be routed. Casualties, you guessed it, are considered dead and will have to be replenished over time. Routed soldiers, on the other hand, are troops that are injured or fled the battle and are added back to the army once the battle is resolved. Battles are resolved once either side runs out of fighting troops. Once the battle is won, it enters the aftermath phase, which lasts for a few days. This is when the victor has the opportunity to chase down and kill any survivors, the routed troops, as mentioned earlier. This is the time for certain men-at-arms to shine, horses. With a high pursuit, or horses, you can kill a large amount of the enemy to really capitalize on your victory. Alternatively, you can have a high amount of screen to make losing battles less penalizing. Archers, for example. Keep in mind that battles will grant you a fairly limited amount of war score, which brings us to sieges. Oh goody, let's learn about that complete and utter nonsense, shall we? Besieging and occupying enemy holdings is the main way of getting war score and winning wars. As mentioned in last week's map dev diary, baronies are their own provinces. You will not have to siege all of them in order to occupy a full county or seize your war goal. Only fortified holdings have to be besieged. So if you are building cities instead of castles and you want them to be well defended, you have to build a wall. Otherwise, me and my merry band of men can come in, rape your women, pillage your lands, and have a right good go at it. So building your defensive structure is very important when this is released. Holdings will be besieged. Castles and county capitals are all fortified by default because you can't have a castle without a wall. That is just a house. and how difficult it is to besiege these holdings being decided by their force level. Fort level can be increased by certain buildings and modifiers. I like the sound of that. I was worried that it will be a straight up development modifier, but it says here that we will have buildings as we do prior in the previous versions of the game, and other modifiers. So hopefully if I'm a more intelligent, martial-minded individual, my defensive structures will be better, whereas if I'm perhaps a more slothful, money counter of a man, I might neglect such affairs. But anyway, each fort level increases the amount of siege progress you need to get before it is occupied. You gain a base amount of siege progress every tick, which can be increased further by heavily outnumbering the garrison or having siege weapons. This constant progress won't change over the course of a siege. It allows you to know what the maximum duration of the siege will be, and you can take that into account as you plan your next move. Sieges also have what we call siege events, which occur with a fixed interval, and you can make the siege progress faster by giving you a one-time siege progress bonus, or increase your base siege progress. Siege weapons are required to get the Breached Walls event, which in turn allow you to directly assault the holding. This is a risky maneuver since it will cost you troops at the benefit of vastly increasing your daily siege progress. This I'm not so much a fan of. Previously, if you had a load of men and the fort wasn't incredibly high, I think the cap is 10, you can just storm. Like medieval era, they used to build these things called ladders. You could build several ladders, you can run up at the wall, you can climb it. You would take a lot of damage, troops would die. It's quite a fortified position if you're up on top of the wall. Ned Stark himself said, a man on a wall is worth 10 down below. So if you are required to have a breach before you can storm, I think that is that's counterproductive to the historical accuracy here. It sounds very EU4-esque, which that would be considered more accurate. But here I don't really agree with that at all. But yeah, siege weapons, eh? This is a risky maneuver, since it will cost you troops. Yes, storming a castle does cost troops, but I should be able to do it without the necessity of having a catapult at hand. But hopefully the catapults aren't that hard to get a hand of. But then you have to wait for the luck of the wall actually falling. I'm not sure, maybe severe penalties for storming without it, because I should still be able to send my men to a wall to die if I decide to make such a ridiculous decision, but maybe the decision is being taken off our hands here. Being attacked while besieging a holding will make you the attacker of the battle, making you lose out on any usual defender bonuses you would get from the terrain. Sieges are therefore slightly riskier, and assaulting the holding to gain control of it before enemy attacks might well be worth the costs. A few final words on moving armies around. As I mentioned briefly in last week's DD thread, major rivers have designated fords for crossing. You can no longer cross them freely as in CK2, and will often have to move your army to find a good place to cross. Beware though, crossing a major river will make you lose advantage should you engage an enemy in battle on the other side, making river crossings for perfect places to catch your opponent. Along with the increased amount of impassable terrain, there are plenty of bottlenecks that you can use to your advantage. Have you ever been annoyed by walking into a province just for a short while in CK2, only to go above the supply limit and lose a bunch of troops? Fear not. Armies now carry an amount of supply with them. Terrific. People have been asking for this for bloody years. Supply is drained whenever armies are in baronies with a lower supply limit than their size. You can therefore safely march through a few baronies with a low supply limit without troops dying. If your army runs out of supply, however, it will start to take attrition and lose troops over time. Supply is increased as long as you are below the supply limits in territory you control. Beware though, your army might not take attrition on low supply, but it will suffer an advantage penalty in battles. Now this is one of the best things I've heard since the release, the announcement of this game. More interactive. It is sometimes ridiculous how I can cross a small bit of land and I go from being in the most luscious farm environment to starving to death. So something like this, very, very happy to hear. Chasing armies deep into enemy land is certainly not recommended. Marching into a county controlled by the enemy that doesn't border anything you control, is not on the coast, will make your army take a single and quite significant attrition hit. If you have a huge amount of troops to spare, though, then perhaps you don't need to worry about it. Alright, well, that was about twice as long as the other dev diaries we've had so far. A lot less pictures. I do enjoy my pictures, but I had to read this time. But anyway, let me know down below what you think of this one so far. Some bad, some good, mostly good from what I'm reading. I am worried that the battles and troops are being significantly simplified. But we'll see as we learn more about the game. Just let me know down below what you think, and I'll get back to you next time. If you want to check out the pages for yourself, I'll leave a link down below. Again, see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.